Chaldean442 sent me an excellent letter, and let me bring up the letter as I will read this. This video will be one of my open letter videos, and I will be talking about his video, his letter to me, since he does not like making videos. Let me just read quickly. US versus British Army Ethos. It is an interesting video and comparisons are interesting. However, I believe your information isn't completely correct when making comparisons. Accuracy, tactics and other things. You cite historical events as a basis for your conclusions, and I admire that. He's speaking to me. I particularly enjoyed the absence of malice, and you can expect the same from me. I believe I have much to say concerning the subject. I've been in the US Army for 9 years. I may be able to give you a little bit more information to equip you on the subject. On revenge, I don't believe the Americans are any different from the Brits. An attack on any nation will incur the wrath of that nation. Pearl Harbor was an act of war, and as such required the prosecution of that war. In comparison, compare the Royal Navy's response to the sinking of the Hood. That was an act of revenge, wouldn't you agree? The American public historically is a distaste for war, and such a people are difficult to rouse to war. Your Churchill understood this well. Even though he and FDR were very close, Franklin D. Roosevelt had no way of rousing the US to war. Your Churchill was actually elated when he heard of Pearl Harbor. It meant that Britain was no longer alone. You also mentioned how British forces turned from killing once the fighting was done. If you remember that once war was over, the Marshall Plan basically rebuilt much of Europe and America and Japan, and of which Britain was the largest recipient of those funds. Most of the debt has been cancelled, and what was owed has been in recent times repaid. You mentioned the emphasis on accuracy and fieldcraft by British forces, implying the Americans do not. In some respects, you are correct. The accuracy part is exceptionally moot. The Germans were shocked when they first met US Marines in World War I, when they were engaged at 800 to 900 metres away and were being killed at those ranges. The Germans swore that they were facing shock troops. No, they were facing Marines with their rifles. The army also did the same at Chateau-Thierry in France. You yourself have pointed out that the gun culture, as well as our Aussie cousins, having such a culture requires one to be accurate with firearms. As for individual training, basic training is always used as standard, but what is often ignored is the advanced training that follows. The British troops go through a much longer courses, but there is notable absence of yelling and stress inducement, which is quite common in US courses. Much of this stems from your divergent philosophies as well as budget constraints. The British forces have a larger budget for their basic training, and so they emphasise individual training, while the US has less money allotted to this area per troop. So, to make the most of the situation, yelling and screaming is common to induce stress to ensure troops are able to perform in stressful environments. Another aspect of training which seems to be ignored by many is corporate training. In this area the US excels as it puts more money into these areas. US forces spend far more time in the field than troops of other nations practicing their fieldcraft. In general terms, US infantry have been in service for about X amount of years and are well-balanced troops capable of operating in different types of terrain. Here we have different terrains ranging from subtropical environments and military post bases in every environment. The US military is thoroughly professional force and hasn't been a conscript force since the days of Vietnam, and yet the myths of the draft army still keep coming up. Some of these myths I've seen as posts on your videos, such as the choice between prison or service. That's comments made on my videos, not what I've said. You have also mentioned that we make warriors, and in this aspect you are correct, but our definition of warriors may or may not be the same. The US military in general does not like to engage in peacekeeping operations, as this is not the role of the military in Chaldean442's view. It is capable and has done peacekeeping operations, but it is something that we prefer not to do. The rules of engagement for such operations put the peacekeeper at a severe disadvantage. The ethos of warfighting is somewhat different. In Baghdad, the US forces were under constant scrutiny by the British and were portrayed as trigger-happy in contrast to the soft approach as in Basra. The soft approach didn't work exceptionally well as al-Sadr was in control of Basra due to political dealings with him, which left the British forces in such a bad position, and much criticism was levied at them by American commanders, and even Iraqi forces had criticised them.